We are the Borg. Lower your shield and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to serve as us. Systems be powerful.
Okay. Oh, this is bad. Hey, folks, I'm Gene Delasala with Audioholics. You have not been assimilated yet. Sound United has, in fact, assimilated the audio industry, and that's what we are here to talk to you about. We have Teo Nikolakis, who also attended the Sound United event with us last week in New Orleans. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Gene. It was so good to be with you down in New Orleans. Isn't that a great city?
That was my first time there. It was a blast. Let me tell you, the enthusiasm there with everybody that was hosting the event, from Sound United to all the press that were there, was really awesome. It was very music focused. The only thing I didn't like about the whole experience is I brought home bronchitis.
I know, you poor guy. We actually had to delay this broadcast, about a week later than we wanted to do it. So I hope you're feeling better. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I'm marginally getting better. I'm pumped up with steroids and antibiotics. So I'm probably going to have you do a lot of the talking tonight. You know, I'm very verbose usually, but I'm going to probably talk a little less because I'm a little verklempt.
Not a problem. So let's kind of go into it. It was fun to be down with all the Sound United folks. And I think that it's worth noting that some people, at least in the enthusiast world, continue to mention DNM, Denon and Marantz. But as of about 2 years ago, Denon and Marantz was bought out by Sound United. And Sound United is now the parent company that has among its brands Denon, Marantz, Definitive Technology, Polk, now Classe, and Boston Acoustics. Did I miss anybody?
No, and in fact, I'm glad you mentioned Class A, because for a while we both thought Class A was a goner, because Bowers and Wilkins kind of abandoned them and they weren't doing any new product development. They just kind of went off the map. So I'm glad to see a brand like Class A resurrected, and they look like they're in full force again, and that's what we'll be talking about today.
Absolutely. And I think I'm excited to talk a little bit about what's going to be happening with Class A. But it was ironic when we showed up down in New Orleans that there was also some pretty big news that added to Sound United's portfolio, right?
That's right. Some new brands have acquired on Sound United. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
So when we were down there was a term sheet that Sound United is now looking to purchase Onkyo, Pioneer, and Integra. So now you're talking about the majority of today's mainstream enthusiast-focused AVRs are going to be under one company's portfolio. So, Gene, what do you think about that?
You know, I guess I have mixed feelings about it. Put it this way: back years ago when Onkyo purchased Pioneer, I thought that was a good move for Onkyo, because Onkyo was having a lot of HDMI issues with their receivers, and I think the Pioneer platforms were more stable. So the fact that those two companies kind of pooled resources, I think they made the production quality of both brands better, and they did a decent job of separating the two brands. They did get somewhat homogenized, especially on the upper end products. Pioneer was transferring their D3 digital amp or Class D amplifiers onto the flagship Onkyo and Integra receivers, but the DSP was a little different. The room correction systems were different. You know, they did enough to differentiate the brands. Back in the day when it was D&M and Denon or Marantz joined Denon, I also think that was a good acquisition, because Denon was always kind of one of the leaders in the AV industry in terms of latest technology and receivers. It was always Denon and Yamaha, okay? Those guys were always the class leaders for as long as I can remember. They were always neck and neck. Marantz was always focused more on the two-channel. They were more focused on, you know, the audiophile kind of market. They didn't have the digital expertise of Denon. So I think when Denon came along, or D&M came along and acquired Marantz, I think it elevated that brand in terms of modernizing their architecture. But I do miss the super flagship products that Marantz used to spit out, you know, those monoblock amplifiers, their old SR14EX and 18EX receivers. Those things were monster 5 and 7 channel receivers that weighed, 70-pound plus. I would like to, now that Sound United has all of these brands, I would like to see more differentiation of the brands. I know that the brand managers kept assuring us that Marantz and Denon are separate entities and their products are very dissimilar. But I would argue to say that they're more similar than they are dissimilar. They both have the same monolithic amp construction. They both have very similar architectures, very similar feature sets. The Marantz gives you a little bit more of the preamp outputs, and they give you their HDAM circuitry and stuff like that. But I think it's time, now that Sound United has 5 receiver brands, I think it's time for them to have one runaway product that is just the flagship, that just plants their flag in the ground and says, we are here. We are meant for the audiophile, because that's all we kept hearing from the CEO of Sound United, is that the young generation is getting they're more embracing audiophile products and sound quality. So why don't we come up with a real kick-ass line of receivers, really high end, that gives roots back, 20 years ago when receivers weighed as much as a boat anchor. And let's come up with an audiophile focused brand of receivers. Throw away those extra zones. You don't need the zone 2, zone 3 crap anymore, especially now that you have HEOS and you have the wireless products that network with that. Let's focus on putting bigger power supplies. Let's focus on putting more heatsink area, better output devices that are stable down to 4 ohms, so you don't have to use that little gimmicky impedance selector switch, which robs your receiver of power. And it's only there for one reason. It's only there so that UL, when they do their tests on 4 ohm loads, the receiver clips at a lower power level and it dissipates less heat and it meets their requirement. Why not ditch that, put some more heatsink area, make the receivers a little bigger for the audiophile line, and give us receivers that could drive 4 ohm loads? That's what I would really like to see.
No, I agree with you. The one thing that I took away from the keynote from Sound United's CEO, Kevin Duffy, was I felt as though he really tried to emphasize that as a company, they're really going to try to curate these brands for differentiation. The thing that I came away with that resonated with me, though, was how they're viewing scale as a competitive advantage. And now that they have all these brands, you have issues such as codec support. You have issues such as chasing after the latest HDMI spec. That takes a lot of engineering resources, manufacturing, QA. And if they can scale those elements across the brands, I think that that is going to give them a competitive advantage. But to your point, how do they keep the brands distinct and different? I'm curious to see what's ultimately going to happen with Class A, because I look at a venerable brand like that, and as you know, I've had some Class A gear in for review, which I've loved. But when you're talking about boutique high-end companies, it's really tough for them to dedicate the engineering resources to keep up with the ever-evolving HDMI spec. And I'm really curious to see how Sound United is going to balance that element of putting their engineering resources to scale across the product line while also keeping them different so they don't, at the end of the day, become homogenized. I think that's the real challenge that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, now that Class A is back and it has the resources of these brands, I would love to see, like when the Denon had the AVP processor, I would love to see a product of that caliber with the Class A name on it, with their analog expertise, having all the latest codecs and HDMI switching, and having the build quality of a Class A. And Class A amplifiers are awesome. As you know, I've measured and reviewed the CT2300 years ago. One of the best linear AB amplifiers I've measured to date, regardless of price. I would like to see more multi-channel options offered. But at the same time, I'm also concerned because there's such a big price gap between Marantz separates, like their power amps, and the Class A amplifiers. And in fact, the Marantz amplifiers, and I hate to say this, guys, I hope you don't get upset, but the Marantz amplifiers right now, as they stand, their multi-channel amps are nothing but more than a glorified receiver amplifier at this point. They don't have the real balls and sweat that the old Marantz amplifiers used to have. So I think, again, it's time to elevate the brand Marantz, because people love vintage Marantz. You go on our Facebook, anytime we do vintage audio posts, it's always Macintosh, Marantz, JBL. Marantz is always there. So the heritage is there. And, Denon has a great heritage as well. Denon does have 2-channel roots. but I really think people resonate with the brand Marantz when they think of audiophile. So why not give us some upscale products now? You have the engineering resources, you have the market share for sure. And I would like to see, you know, bigger, better amplifiers out there. I would also like to see some truth in advertising with power. And in fact, Teo, you know this because you've read the article. I've written an article that's kind of a call to action to Sound United. Not to put them on the spot, but they are the biggest audio entity out there that deals with AV receivers and amplifiers. Why don't we have more truth in advertising and amplifier power? In fact, I propose that we drop the one-channel driven nonsense and at least go back to the two-channel FTC mandate of full bandwidth with both channels driven. And I have also another option about driving the front 3 channels at 100% and then driving all remaining channels at 1/8 or 1/10%, depending on how many channels there are, and to make sure that the front 3 channels maintain at least 70% of the 2-channel rated power. I think that gives people a lot of useful information about if their receiver will have enough power to drive their speakers. It also allows them to differentiate whether they need to go the separates route. Because right now, you go and buy a Marantz receiver that's rated at 150 watts times 11, or you could go buy their separates. They're like, what's the point? There's the same power rating. There's no difference. Well, of course, there are some differences because you've got separate power supplies as opposed to a common power supply that's powering a receiver. But if we're more honest about the way that these amplifiers and these receivers are being rated, then it gives people the need or the necessity or the want or the desire, whatever you want to call it, to want to upgrade to better products or more powerful products to meet the demand of their speaker loads or for their loud listening levels or for their large rooms. And I think right now, it seems like ever since Atmos came out, they're cramming more amplifiers into the same 7-channel chassis. And instead of deflating the power ratings, they're increasing the power ratings by rating 1-channel driven. And that nonsense, it really has to stop. And I'm not trying to get on my soapbox too much, but the fact of the matter is, almost no AV publication anymore besides us actually measure amplifier performance. That's gone. Sound Division doesn't do amplifier measurements anymore. So there's really no third party out there that's measuring multi-channel receivers other than us. So, and the FTC, it's kind of, amplifiers are off their radar. It's just too small of a commodity for them to worry about. So why don't we have better disclosure of power? I think by being more honest and open about this stuff, you're going to gain more brand loyalty. And I think it's just it's a win for everybody in the industry if we could do that.
Gene, you're absolutely right. The other thing that it does is it sort of does away with some of these conspiracy theories too. We were talking offline before the broadcast about a link and some forum comments and some enthusiasts who are also, hey, they want to know what an AVR's true power is. And then you start getting to the alternative spectrum where people expect something like an 8500, which we were talking about. Well, what's the power rating of 13 channels driven at the same time? And then that becomes the power measure. Well, that's you're never going to drive all 13 channels at full bandwidth. And I think that, Gene, what you're proposing, and as you mentioned, I've had the advantage of looking at the article, makes a lot of sense between 2-channel power rating and then looking at the 3-channel at 70%, because that's really going to give the enthusiast all the data they really need to know about what the performance of the AVR is going to be.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, when you're looking at how power is distributed in a home theater, the majority of the power, aside from the subwoofer channel, obviously that's the most power consumption, the bass. But the front 3 LCR speakers are the ones that are getting hit the hardest. They're the ones that are providing the anchored dialogue, the action. They're on more percentage of the time than the surrounds, and especially the height channels. So to really make sure that you're getting that rated power for the front 3 channels makes a lot of sense. And then when people start saying, well, what does it do with 13 channels driven? Well, when you start going beyond 7 channels and you're getting above 150 watts, you're starting to check the max power capability of your wall outlet, because a 15 amp line will only give you 1800 watts. So you only have so much power to play with, especially when you deal with amplifier efficiencies thrown in. So it just doesn't make sense to run all the channels full tilt at the same time. But another thing that receiver manufacturers could give us that's useful, if they don't want to do the all channels driven rating, give us a fuse rating on the back of the receiver or give us max power consumption. A lot of these receivers will say 500 watts, but that's not max power consumption. That's, you know, 2 channels driven with the other channels driven at 1/8, or it's really all over the map. Years ago, like the Denon 5805 and the 5803, they would tell you the max power on the back of the receiver, or they would tell you the fuse rating. And then you could kind of jerry rig and figure out how much power you're actually going to get with multiple channels driven. That kind of information is useful. I like to keep quoting Dr. Floyd Toole. You get more useful information on the sidewall of a car tire than you do on loudspeakers. I'm going to change that and say you get the same thing. You get more useful information on the sidewall of a tire than you do on a receiver's specification on an internet website or in their manual in some cases.
I love it. I love it. So why don't we kick down to one other topic that I think is fair from at least what I heard. Going back to what Kevin Duffy, Sound United CEO, said, is they really assured us that I don't think most of the enthusiasts know that within Sound United, there's actually a dedicated brand manager to each of the brands. And that person is responsible for making sure that there is differentiation among, you know, the Denons, the Marantzes, you know, the definitive techs and what have you. And what I also found fascinating, and Gene, you and I laughed about this in a really good way, is I didn't know that Marantz and Denon had their own individual sound authority, someone who's dedicated to identifying what the Marantz sound is and has the final say for voicing, and Denon. So I don't know what impression that left you with.
Yeah, I mean, I liked hearing that, but at the same token, I'm thinking to myself, and Mark Henninger from ABS Forum brought this up, and I'm glad he did, is you design products to be flat and linear. So there's only so much voicing you could do without moving away from that linear scale, because obviously you want your frequency response to be plus or minus 0 dB from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz when it comes to electronics. So, and then you got room correction, of course, that changes all that. So I hear what they're saying, and I kind of understand, you know, there's some things they maybe can do that make the things sound warmer. Like maybe a Marantz receiver, they might bias the amplifiers a little bit higher into Class A, which dissipates more heat, but it also gives it potentially a warmer sound because you have less crossover distortion, you know, at a watt or whatever. So I guess there's some things they can do, and I commend them for actually having that and having people that are passionate about the brands maybe voicing the product or putting the final say on what parts goes in this product versus what parts goes in that product. So I do think that there is some good to that as well.
No, agreed. One of the other things I came across in the keynote that I didn't know about, and I don't think you did either, is that Sound United has created now this nonprofit called Sound Start Music Foundation. And it's something that is, it's an organization that's dedicated to donating 10,000 instruments to children worldwide in the 2020 to 2021 academic year. And I thought that was really great to see, because what I came away with was this is a company that, as a corporate culture, the employees are focused on music. We had the failed musician theme that was going on as well. But that's the passion that I came away with. And I really love the notion that, gee, if you're buying one of the Sound United brands, you're investing in our kids' future as well.
Yeah, it's always great to have a cause, and I commend them for that. In fact, we'll put a link in the description of the video after we're done with the live broadcast for anyone that wants to check that out. I did like the music focus emphasis of this whole meeting. You know, we got to hear the New Orleans music, the culture of the city. It was unbelievable. We went to a bar at the end of one of the nights that you didn't go to this, but I actually went, and it was a band there that was playing traditional New Orleans jazz, and we were in this like little kind of room that was all wooden and had all this artwork. It was all preserved. You couldn't use your phone or anything like that. And Kevin Duffy was there, and all the top execs of Sound United were there, and it was just cool that guys at this level, you know, that run these corporations are so involved locally in a cause and in the music. And you could tell that these guys that are running this company really do like audio products. I mean, they really do have a passion for audio. So it's not just some conglomerate that purchased all of these brands. It's actually people that are managing that actually care about audio and care about the brands and care about their heritage. So I walked away feeling pretty good about that. The other thing I'd like to say too is even before this acquisition of Onkyo and Pioneer, I do think Sound United has been doing a good job of differentiating, you know, brands like Polk and Definitive Technologies. I don't think either of those brands have homogenized together. There's definitely separation in how they decide what is the target curve for audio, or what their nirvana is. We heard different demos from Def Tech, and we heard different demos from Polk. They have different design philosophies, and there's multiple ways, you know, to reach nirvana. And they demonstrated that to us with two different brands, with two different kind of sound signatures and two different design philosophies.
And maybe that's a good segue to talk about the first demo that we were at, and that was that the Def Tech demo with the Marantz gear. I think it was the SR 8012, and we were sitting there with that Dolby Atmos and that IMAX enhanced event, and it was a good also to finally get my hands on an IMAX enhanced demo disc so I can test it in my basement setup.
Yeah, that was a really good demo, actually. I was impressed. They used the BP 9080s up front and the 9060s in the back. They didn't have a dedicated subwoofer channel, and I didn't know this, but they recommend when you run the BP towers to not use the line level inputs on them, because they do all the bass management internally in the speaker. So what they did was they ran the speakers large and they turned the subwoofer channel off, and that routed LFE only to the main channels. It doesn't route LFE to the rear channels. But those main 9080s had some pretty good surface area and power on those subs. I don't know if they have 12-inch drivers. I forgot what the exact spec is on them. But the demo was really good. I did not know that the IMAX version of it was a theatrical mix, as opposed to most movies that are released on Blu-ray or near-field mixes. So that's a really big advantage if you can get these theatrical mixes as opposed to near-field mixes.
I agree. And I think that part of what's happened with IMAX Enhanced is we haven't had a lot of information in the press as reviewers. So even when I did the 8500 review, I really didn't have much of anything to do some testing on and some A/B comparisons. So as more and more information has been coming out, especially that notion that really what you're getting is the theatrical mix, I think it's going to be a very interesting immersive audio format to test out in the home. My only the only thing I continue to be disappointed out is I'm such a big fan of Oro 3D's Voice of God overhead speaker. And I do wish that IMAX Enhanced had done, you may know that the IMAX theatrical mix is actually a 12 channel, not an 11 channel. So that way, when they bring it to the house, you're really maxed out at 7.1.4. And I would have loved to have seen a 7.1.5 with the overhead center channel, the overhead center Voice of God top speaker engaged. I think that would make an incredible difference in how these the reproduction is going to be.
You know, it would be interesting if you could take that disc and maybe upmix it with the Oro upmixer just to see what kind of effect you get, since you could still cross mix on the 8500.
You know, I'll have to do that. Now that I've got the demo disc, I'll have to test that out, and we'll have to talk about that. But a couple of things that I came away with was that was pretty much the setup that I had when I did the review on the Def Tech speakers, except that I had a five speaker setup as opposed to the 7. And as you know, that was not a great room for Atmos and immersive audio. The ceiling wasn't flat. It had some lighting up top, and yet and we were talking about Dolby Atmos enabled speakers that bounce the sound off the ceiling, right? Our bouncy speakers. And yet it had some great hallmarks. You had this incredible sense of depth and space all around you. So it's not just to the horizontal plane, also in the vertical plane. And you did have some discrete overhead effects. So the demo tracks were Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, that great helicopter scene. And the other from the IMAX Enhanced demo disc was one of the space shuttle launches. And that was very impressive.
Yeah, and part of the reason why that those speakers sounded as good as they did is Definitive really, they went a long way in terms of their second generation Atmos module. They abandoned that ridiculous paper cone woofer that Dolby spec'd for the A60, and they went with their own design that timbre matched the drivers that are in the front of the speaker. I'm not sure if they're still using the Dolby crossover or not, but they've done a lot to basically isolate that speaker to control, the directivity of the speaker, so most of it goes up as opposed to just scattering around. So that was a much better demo than I heard when I had the A60s in my house several years ago.
No, I'd agree. It was, I think, a good sense of what I experienced in my theater downstairs that had a far lower ceiling than what we were dealing with. And I think that's also worth noting, too, is the ceiling was higher than what the Dolby spec was. And we still got a really good sense. So the point being is, if anyone out there who's listening has been vacillating or hasn't been convinced, we are telling you that immersive audio is absolutely the real deal. It's something incredible. It's something you should absolutely try to implement in your setup. And if you can't do discrete in-ceiling speakers or on-wall front and rear speakers, you know what? The Dolby Atmos speakers, if you've got the right ceiling for it, are not a bad alternative. So that was my takeaway.
Yeah, and especially if you have the newer ones, not the little Wizardcomb Woofer Wonders.
Agreed. So then once we were done with the definitive, we went into a room where we had front, left, and right side had different demos. So the first up was a definitive tech bookshelf setup that had some Denon 2-channel gear. And I don't know what you thought, but that was pretty darn good, especially some of the bass response on that little bookshelf speaker.
Yeah, do you have pictures that you want to share on your screen?
You know what? While we're talking, let me pull them up here, and let me see what I've got loaded here.
Yeah, so Definitive has they have the passive radiators built into their small speakers, so that really allows them to extend the bass. You don't hear port chuffing in the speaker, and I thought that bookshelf speaker sounded really good. And then they had the new Denon 2-channel stuff. So they had, what was it, an SACD player?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I think they also had one of the network players connected too.
Yeah, and they also had an integrated amplifier, and that thing looked really nice.
Gene, the other thing that really I took as something to note is I think there's really been a lot of movement nowadays in the house to go towards sound bars. Somebody who wants a small footprint, either a sound bar or a smart speaker. And listening to that Definitive Tech demo just really reiterated for me, there is no substitute whatsoever for a dedicated 2-channel setup, and that you can do so in a small footprint.
Yeah, it was the demand speakers that we were listening to.
Okay, got it. So I'm going to bring up some photos, but the photos that I have are actually of the next demo, which we saw to our left, which was the Polk Audio and Marantz setup. So why don't you talk about those towers?
That's the first time I've heard a modern Polk tower in quite some time. I actually really thought it sounded great. The bass was really tight on it. There was good extension. The high frequencies were really good. You know, I think they use a ring radiator tweeter, but they claim it's their own design. I thought it was a VIFA, but they claim that it's actually theirs. But I thought the system sounded very balanced. I mean, it sounded like when we were listening to the Definitive bookshelves, it had that kind of linearity, only it was, more expansive, more bandwidth, more bass. And yeah, I really liked the sound of it. I thought that was a good demo.
Agreed. And you know what? I have to tell you that Polk has sort of been off my personal radar for a while. And it's probably been about 10 years, a good 10 years, since I've taken a good listen to Polk. And I have to tell you, I was pretty darn impressed in the direction that that Sound United has been taking that brand. And obviously there's some things we can't talk about that we saw with Polk. But,
yeah,
overall, this is a brand that with what Sound United is doing with them, it really left me impressed and put it back on my radar.
So I pulled up, can you see my screen right now, Teo?
I can.
Okay, so here's the demo that we did with the 9080s with the Marantz SR8012 for IMAX. And there's the equipment. They had a couple of Marantz pieces here. The Pioneer Blu-ray player. Oh, that's a Class A amp. We'll talk about that later. Yeah, these are the speakers you were talking about. Here's the Denon
exactly
integrated amp, SACD player, and like you said, a network player.
Mm-hmm.
And is that Tom Norton that we see there in the background?
Yeah, Tom was next to you.
Yep, yep. He's from Sound and Vision, in case you guys don't know.
And you know what? Let me share it out. I've got, before we go to the Class A, can you see my screen?
Let me go. Yes.
And that was the Polk demo right there.
Yeah.
Those sounded really, really good.
And it was a pretty modest amplifier they were using. They were using an integrated Marantz, kind of a slim amplifier. I'm guessing the thing was probably about 100 watts a channel, maybe 200 watts a channel, 4 ohms. So
that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, so those speakers probably have to be about 90, 91 dB efficiency.
And then once we were done with the Polk and Marantz demo, then we kicked over to Class A. And, you know, I have a real love for Class A. I've had a lot of respect for the company, and just having had the products in for a while, you got a chance to be right next to that incredible Delta mono powerhouse with the open top, so we could see the power supply in there. So that toroid was what, about 6 inches in diameter? I don't even know. It was massive.
You don't want to pick that amplifier up, and that's a monoblock. I think it weighs probably about 100 pounds. That's
Agreed.
Yeah, it's a state of the art. I mean, the ice tunnel that they do is just amazing. We've talked about that in the review before. It's a way of keeping everything cool. I mean, I know that a lot of the esoteric amplifiers like to run so hot that you could cook an egg on them.
Mm-hmm.
But in the long run, you're talking about reducing component life when you have that much heat. And the thing about Class A amplifiers is they bias, I think the first 35 watts of those amplifiers are biased into Class A operation, which means those transistors are on 100% of the time, but that amplifier doesn't burn. You know, it runs cool because of their tunneling method. And then they switch over to Class AB at higher power. And it's just a very efficient design. In fact, when I tested out the 2300, the only time I was able to get the fans to turn on was when I did bench testing, and that was when I was probably testing it at 2 ohm loads. So under speaker load conditions, I never really heard the fans turn on.
And it's great. And let me tell you, with the Magicos, it sounded really good. And that was not a good sounding room to begin with. Bass was boomy depending on where you were standing. The bass would shift somewhat radically. And yet you knew that those amps had absolute authoritative control over every driver in that Magico speaker. It was something really impressive.
And I love the meters that they put on, and that's hard to find now. Though, to get those glass analog meters, they're very expensive, very rare to find. I would love to see more manufacturers at least put like TFT meters like Anthem did with the STR, because I like seeing power meters. I don't know, I'm just kind of old-fashioned with that.
I'm with you. And speaking of old-fashioned, I thought it was cool that we actually got a demo with reel-to-reel. Wasn't that amazing?
That was really cool. What was funny was it Dave Naber that
yes.
From Class A? He's like, yeah, he goes, I know you guys like vinyl, but vinyl's too hard to set up to get it to sound right. But I could just put it on my reel-to-reel player, put the tapes in, and it sounds great. I was like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that reel-to-reel was a lot easier to set up than a good record player. But yeah, it sounded good. The only demo I didn't like was the Steely Dan Gaucho. That was way too much bass. But to their defense, I mean, that recording is very bass intense. So I don't know if it was something with the mix or what, but that was the only demo I heard that day in that room that was like, man, that bass is like 10 dB too hot. But everything else sounded really good.
And you know, let's give a little background for everyone. So the Tascam that you're seeing right now, that reel-to-reel player, is actually Dave Naber's personal reel-to-reel recorder. Dave and I talked about it the night before, and we had a great conversation about it. And that mix that Gene's talking about, the Gaucho mix, when the reel-to-reel tape went on, you could actually hear the mixing engineer talking into the microphone about what mix take it was. So that was kind of really cool to have that added layer and element to everything.
Yeah, that is cool. You know, and I like the fact that we're back. You know, we're focusing on audio quality, focusing on 2-channel. Of course, we do all the latest streaming. You could do Tidal, you could do, you know, QBiz, whatever all the latest apps are. But I like the fact that people are still going back to vinyl or even reel-to-reel, stuff like that. It's not that these formats are better than the digital formats, but it is more of an art form to me, you know, to actually sit there and tangibly hold something and to put the record down and actually commit to listening to that whole side of the record as opposed to just skipping through tracks. I think it does add to the experience for people. And if you invested this much money into an audio system, why not invest the time to actually listen to it? These formats force you to listen.
You know, Gene, that's a good point. And I'd be curious to kind of get everybody's opinion at some point, even with my own kids. I think that we've made music a background activity. And I think that in the long run, we do ourselves a disservice. Music's an event. And the fact that, I don't remember if we talked about it earlier, all of the Sound United employees were wearing a t-shirt either of their favorite band or of their favorite concert or a concert that they've attended. And I thought that was a pretty powerful statement that music matters. And each of us probably has some very powerful memory associated with either a concert or a live event or some musical recording that's moved us, made the hair on our arms stand on end. And when we relegate music to just this passive activity, I think we lose that fundamental element that is part of our humanity. So I really appreciate those comments and what you're saying. The format does matter, and I think it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And the great thing about it now is you've got one entity or one brand, Sound United, and they cover it all. I mean, Denon has been releasing turntables. Marantz has their 2-channel stuff. Denon has now their 2-channel stuff. You've got Classe. You've got speakers ranging in various price forms between Definitive and Polk. The one thing I thought was interesting was when Kevin Duffy was talking about how they want to have more international market space, particularly in loudspeakers. I'm thinking to myself, I know they're not going to purchase someone like Bowers & Wilkins because they've been purchased recently by another entity that's running them. The only brand to me, and I'm just speculating, but it makes sense for me if they're going to really expand into the international market, then one of the biggest brands there that's probably logistically easy to acquire financial wise would be someone like Monitor Audio. So I want to make that prediction now. I think that Monitor Audio is on their radar.
All right. And let's see what happes.
Yeah.
So let's kick over to the next demo that we saw then, and that was really the Smart Assistant Smart Home demo. So I'll just do a quick screen share. I don't have a lot of the photos here. And let me just bring this guy to the front. But Gene, in my experience, what I've sort of noted here when I've had some of the products in for review is I still see the smart home products as a work in progress. They're okay for basic voice commands. I want to stream something from one room to another, but I really don't see this as Star Trek worthy just yet. To me, it's still something that's relatively, and I want to hesitate to use the word gimmicky because that's not fair, but something that I still don't feel comfortable using for day in, day out, and I don't think it liberates me from my remote control.
Well, they're relying on a third party to make this, to drive this technology, right? I mean, you have to rely on Amazon that they're keeping their voice commands active and updated and everything like that. I'm running a little bit of that in my home. I'm using Control 4 for home automation in my entire home to control all 3 of my theaters and distributed audio. But you're right. When I use the Amazon talking stuff, I don't want to say the A word because I'm going to activate everybody's Alexa. But it's very limited. I can tell it to basically turn my lights on and off and maybe raise the volume up and down, but I'm not telling it to do macro commands in my home theater yet. I don't think we're there yet, and it's not 100% reliable. There's several times when I have to yell at the thing to tell it to turn off the lights in my theater room, and it's asking me if I want to find out some information about the next Star Trek movie. It's like it's not quite there.
Yeah, that's true. One of the products that I have seen, I think there's some potential to it, is that I use Simple Control. And one of the elements that I really like about Simple Control is it has AirPlay 2 support, which means that I can use Siri with it. So all of the macros that I can program into the UI, I could say, for example, hey Siri, turn on the Basement Theater Blu-ray, and boom, 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 boom. It's going to do that, and it's probably going to do that on my phone. That's what I found to be really helpful. Those sorts of things. But above and beyond that, let's see how the product evolves. But the point being is, it's nice to see, again, Sound United is integrating Josh.ai. They've got AirPlay 2. They have Amazon Alexa, and they have Google Assistant. So if that's something that, again, enthusiasts are looking for, this is a company that's made a concerted engineering effort into those technologies, and now they're able to bring them across the portfolio. So I think that's a huge competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I thought it was a cool demo when they had the room set up with speakers in various different rooms, and they could just go to one that has the little microphone and say, "Hey, turn on music in dining room," and it'll turn it on in the dining room. So I think that high level stuff is really useful for people that want to basically take zones of music or music that's in one zone, throw it into another zone without having to pick up a remote control or do any type of fancy commands. Something like that, my mom would love something like that. So I could see that there's definitely appeal to it.
No, agreed. And as you know, we're planning on doing a larger review of the AV8805, Marantz's 13.2 channel pre-pro. And as we've been talking about doing something with the review to differentiate that from the Denon 8500, what I'm really thinking of doing very seriously is doing a concerted focus on the HEOS smart home implementation of that product with multiple zones. And Denon, which they didn't have on site in New Orleans, they actually make I think it's a 1 or 2U chassis, where it has 4 Class D amplifier modules that are all HEOS enabled. So basically you can power up to 4 different zones and do that over the network. So imagine you have a product like that paired with either a Denon, a Marantz, and now you really have a true custom installer friendly ecosystem, all based on HEOS with voice commands. I mean, that's something that I think adds a lot of value.
Yeah, that is really slick. And again, that's another reason why we don't need to have multi-zone products anymore. They could drop the zone 2 and zone 3 from receivers and preamps, especially when you have your own music management system like Denon and Marantz has.
No, very true. A couple of other things that I wanted to try to segue into actually is the custom installation. The only time that we've kind of touched upon it a little bit has been in the 8500 review, where we were, at least in a very cursory sort of way, mentioned some of these features. But it wasn't until that demo in New Orleans where I really got to see some of the under the hood power, and I was impressed. So for example, let's say that you're a custom installer or you're a pretty advanced enthusiast. Now, what Denon and Marantz products have built in is integration with cloud management services. So the demo was pretty cool, where they had a cloud management service and they were able to turn the Denon on and off. They were able to automatically change inputs. They were able to debug. They were able to see what sources were connected. They could turn input menus on and off. So I think that level of control, especially from a custom installation point of view, is really going to put these products, which already had a very powerful, reliable, and flexible command set for custom installers, just takes it up to the next level.
Yeah, and it eliminates unnecessary field calls, right? Like if there's a problem, a configuration problem or whatever, some of that can be troubleshooted off-site and not have to go to the customer's house.
Right. And there were 2 other elements that I thought were really, really cool. Number one, which we had mentioned in the 8500 review, was HDMI debugging. So basically you plug it into 2 ports on the back of the Denon and the Marantz, you execute some commands, and this is not in the regular user manual. One of the things that the folks from Sound United were pretty clear in saying is some of these things require an advanced user. It's really made for the custom installer, and if you don't know what you're doing, you can actually brick the machine. So I respect that. But it was amazing to see. You'll be able to tell what an HDMI cable is rated for just by plugging it in, what it will pass. And what I thought was really, really cool had to do with the ability to custom set the what's called the EDID for an individual input and source. And for those of you who don't know what an EDID is, EDID, in a nutshell, what it is you need to start thinking of HDMI connections as networks, because that's what they really are. So all the devices talk to each other. So let's say that you have your Denon or your Marantz AVR, and then you plug that into your TV, and then you plug in your source. Let's say it's an Apple TV. All of those different devices are communicating one another, and they're telling each other what their capabilities are. So the 4K Apple TV is saying, hey, I'm capable of Dolby Vision and I'm capable of 4K output. Your TV is going to say, hey, I am capable of 1080p, or I'm capable of 4K plus HDR. And then they pretty much negotiate across the spectrum. Well, the problem becomes that sometimes you have some devices that misbehave. And when they do so, they can cause problems. Sometimes that means that you just get a blank screen. Sometimes it causes some other issues. So the point being is you can actually specify at the input level on the AVR and custom set what that device should be broadcasting to the rest of the network. So for example, if you have an Apple TV and you're saying, gee, this guy needs to explicitly state that it's a 4K HDR, you can set that. You can set the audio channels that are available. So again, from a custom installation perspective, you've probably run into some of those issues. I've run into them over the years over my house, and I have various products that I use to be able to custom sign EDID on various inputs. And the fact that that's now built in is a huge, huge, huge asset. So I was ecstatic to hear that from a CI, a custom installer point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that Sound United has amazing amounts of engineering resources behind their products, and it makes a lot of sense that they are now the leader in AV receivers, because they can pull these resources and every brand can benefit from it, like you were saying, with the advanced HDMI debugging and the EDID control. So I think personally that this is an opportunity for them to elevate all of the brands and to potentially differentiate one of them as the real audiophile focused brand. Something that I'm personally hoping for, to bring back the super receiver. I miss those, 70, 80, 100-pound receivers, the days of the Denon AVR 5805. Bring it back. And now that you've got potentially good Class D amplification with Pioneer, I'm sure there could be some interesting stuff that happens there. I know I keep talking about power, but power is always on my mind. Why not come out with models that will truly drive forum loads for the front two channels at least? Double up those output devices on those front two channels, get rid of that stupid impedance switch. And I'd be a happy camper, because I'll be measuring it on my audio precision all the time. I'm the only one left doing it. So it gives me something to write about, guys. Come on, give me something to write about. Give me a reason to use my audio precision.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, you know what? I think that's also a good point that you make. I don't know what your feeling is, but the last two sessions of the day I found to be really refreshing. And the last two sessions specifically were with Brendan Steed, who's the Senior Vice President of Product Development and Engineering. And we had a solid half hour of an open forum with him. And he just wanted to listen to what we as reviewers, we as journalists felt about the products. And as you know, I had a list of about 11 items that I, in rapid succession, hit them with. But I came away saying, wow, this is a company whose culture is about listening. And that, to me, spoke volumes.
While they're listening, if we have their attention, please get rid of the GEQ. We don't need a glorious tone control. Please give us parametric equalization. So for those of us that like to manually tune in our subwoofers, We have the ability to control the frequency that we want to do the filter and the bandwidth of the filter and the amplitude of the filter. So I'm really hoping it's the year 2019 that Denon and Marantz, with all their advanced HDMI and all their advanced DSP, drop the GEQ, that's 1990s technology, and give us a manual parametric EQ.
Well, we'll see what they do. My wish list, Gene, and let me highlight a couple of things for everybody who's listening that we talked about. Number one is we talked about Odyssey. And Odyssey, I think we need to say it's a solid product, and I think it's come a long way. But from our perspective, and what I've noticed when I've done the reviews, is there's something wrong in the way that it initially does the bass volume and how it handles the room gain. So it was refreshing to be able to express that. And I think what my takeaway was is basically you need to increase Odyssey's bass output by a couple of dB, and that hopefully that's something that can be adjusted at the point when you're starting Odyssey and it's setting the initial volume. And I think
really,
that
that's the problem. It's when it's telling you to set your subs to 75 dB, it's too low. And I've found every time I run Odyssey, I got to crank it another 4 to 6 dB, depending on if I'm running one or multiple subs.
Exactly. And I think that if Sound United can address that issue, that's going to go a long way in addressing some of the things that we read about in the forum, because the average enthusiast, my sense, is just plopping the microphone down, regardless of whether it's Odyssey, if it's Arc, if it's Dirac, and they expect these products just to do things on their own. So they're not going to sit there and do some of the tweaking that someone who has a lot more experience with the product. So if that gets fixed, I think that's going to go an awful long way. So I was encouraged by that conversation.
The other thing I'd like to see is I like to see them follow Anthem's lead with the fact that you could run your calibration through your PC and not have to rely on plugging the mic into the receiver. Because in many cases, like I have an Integra receiver that's in my theater room that's powering my bedroom system. I can't use the room correction because I can't run a microphone cable from upstairs in my theater room all the way down to the bedroom. It's just impractical. It won't work. There's, not enough gain. There's too much signal loss. So to be able to remotely do this, especially since you have the remote management system that you were talking about before, why not put Odyssey room correction on that remote management system? So that way you could just remotely correct your system through your PC. It's much quicker than running it through the Odyssey editor app. I found, trying to calibrate through the app and then upload all that data to the receiver is just, I have too much ADD. I can't sit there and wait that long. It's just when I run Anthem Arc, it's much quicker. It's a much less painful, or painless, I should say, project for me to run Anthem Arc as opposed to running Odyssey. So I'd like to see some refinement there.
I agree with you. And I run both Anthem Arc with a 7.1.4, and then I have the 8500 in the 7.2.6 setup, and the Denon running Odyssey with those 13. And don't forget, it actually, in my situation, it's calibrating all 15 channels because it's doing both Oro and Atmos and DTSX. It takes a good 45 minutes to do it.
Well, you got to lower the number of microphone positions. I think you were doing like 20 positions or something last time I talked to you. You were getting ridiculous. You got to limit it to 6 to 8 max. 6 is probably all you need.
All right, we won't go there. I was doing 8, so that's.
I remember you were at this thing till 3 o'clock in the morning. But you were shaking. You haven't eaten in hours. I'm like, come on, man, you gotta calm down.
Well, that's because you're getting me doing these YouTube lives after I'm either in New York for 12 hours or whatever it is. But that's okay. We're doing it for West Coast folks, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think there's opportunity here to improve upon Odyssey. I also think there's some opportunity to do some more advanced bass management stuff, especially now that Definitive is recommending to run those speakers full range without running LFE line level into it. I would like to see some more advanced bass management options offered in the upper tier products for Denon and Marantz, so we could recombine LFE to the main channels and still have a subwoofer channel. I've been asking for that probably for 10 years or so. And the only way to get those kind of feature sets is to get a really expensive processor from the likes of Trinov, Storm Audio, Datasat, And unfortunately, a lot of those products don't have an on-screen display, and you have to run them through a PC or a tablet. And I like having an on-screen overlay. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to setting up my AV products. I like to be able to instantly pull that up from the screen that I'm watching it on. So I would like to see Sound United kind of give some of these options that are typically only available in custom audio products. They've got the engineering resources to do it, and you could hide these things in an advanced menu or in a receiver editor app or something you set up online. That way the average Joe can't mess with it.
Agreed. There were a couple of other requests that I had made of the Sound United folks. And again, it was really refreshing to have that opportunity to talk to them. And once we were done with Brendan Steed, we had a one-on-one opportunity with the CEO, Kevin Duffy. And I thought that, again, was really great. I felt that Kevin listened. And my comment was specifically, I think that Sound United needs to put EQ in all of their products right across the board, including their sound bars, including their Hios amps and preamps. Because if in my situation, let's say I have my kitchen speakers or I have the two in-wall speakers that are in the bedroom or in the living room, I want to be able to EQ those. And right now you can't. And EQ is such a differentiating factor that if I could take my smart device, I could use the microphone, run a couple of tone sweeps, have things auto EQ, or Gene, to your point, at least be able to do some PEQ on those. That would really make the speakers perform optimally. So I'd really like to see that coming out of the Sound United products.
Yeah, that's true. And then, from a business side standpoint, I think we forgot to mention one thing I find interesting, according to Kevin Duffy, is the brands that sell Sound United products. If they carry at least 3 brands, I think they double their sales volume.
That's correct.
Yeah. So this is actually from a consumer standpoint, there's some real benefits now, because if you go to a Sound United dealer, they could do package systems. You could do a 5.1 definitive speaker system with a Denon receiver and a Pioneer blu-ray player, and maybe get 5 to 10% or 15%, whatever the discount is, because they never want you to go below MSRP for individual SKUs. But when you mix it all together as a package, then you're looking at something where you could do, a package deal. In the long run, you definitely get some savings there.
No, agreed. So I guess in summary, Gene, I left with a couple of thoughts. First of all, I thought that New Orleans was the perfect venue. I love the vibe of the city. I love the food. I love the music. It's just one of my favorite cities in the U.S. So I got to give high marks to Sound United. Number 2 is I liked hearing the fact that Sound United recognizes what their organizational challenges are and what their business challenges are. And that is, you really are being entrusted as a curator of all of these really incredible brands that have a rich heritage and a rich history. And I'm most excited, if I was to say from my highlights, I've become over time a big Denon AVR fan. And that it was not that was not a brand that I had in my setup. And it wasn't until I sort of got the review models in, I had a chance to kick the tires on them, that they found a permanent home. But the fact that Class A is now part of the portfolio, that I saw the energy and the care and the curation that Sound United is given, I'm really excited as to seeing what Class A is going to come out with over time. And then finally, Polk, just that company, I think, mark my words, over the next 12 months, you are going to see some incredibly exciting things coming out from Polk. So guys, get it back on your radar. That is a brand you've got to watch.
Yeah, and it was awesome meeting, one of the engineers there that was there back in the 80s with the SDA line of speakers. So it's like you could see that there's people that have stayed around with these brands, even though they've been acquired multiple times. There's still love and passion in those brands, despite the fact that they were acquired. So they've obviously been handled well.
Yeah. So, Gene, any other final thoughts, takeaways, or challenges?
I think we're good. I think next week's going to be interesting when I post that article. I hope it's well received. I hope the people at Sound United kind of get back to me and say, you know what, we're on board. We want to look at disclosing power more openly and more usefully to consumers, because they did ask us, you know, how can we improve the brands? How can we improve the integrity of the brands? Whatever. This is a great way to lead the way, because they have the biggest market share. So I'm curious to see where this goes, because I think if they lead by example, then other companies like Yamaha will follow suit. I don't like the fact that we're starting to see even separate amplifier companies. Like I was looking at Emotiva's website on their 11-channel amp and only one channel driven spec. I don't like seeing one channel driven spec on multi-channel amplifiers. So I don't like that trend. We have to kind of be more vigilant now that there's nobody measuring amplifiers except for us. And we hope that the industry will accommodate and want to be truthful and more disclosing in real power. So I think that's the biggest thing that I'm worried about at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hashtag whatever it takes, right, Gene?
I have to have a cause, man. I have to have a reason to use my engineering degree that I got on the wall back there. So hopefully that this gives me that cause.
Well, on a personal note, you know, you and I now have known each other for many, many years, and I think that's one thing that I've grown to respect tremendously from you. Just our sidebar conversations, the care that you have about the audio hobby, the concern that you have about manufacturing and marketing honesty. I don't know that the contribution that Audioholics has made over the past 20 years can truly be measured in the industry. So, you know, somebody who works with you, somebody who's your friend and a colleague, I love you for it. And I love the passion, and I'm excited by some of these opportunities. And I hope that Sound United especially, they just seemed like such a great company. And I hope that they will take this wonderful challenge to heart, because it's a challenge for leadership in the industry. And I think it's a call, hopefully not just from Audioholics, but it'll be from all the other online AV mags and reviewers to say, we need a brand that we can trust to take a leadership position and set the standard for everybody to follow.
Yeah, I appreciate all those nice comments and compliments that you've given me, Teo. Really appreciate that. And, you know, it is refreshing to see there are still a couple of brands out there that are giving you more, they're disclosing the power more honestly. Brands like NAD, for example, if you look at the way, excuse me, they rate, you know, 2 channels driven full bandwidth and then all channels driven as well. And obviously the power numbers aren't as impressive, but they're giving you what's real about the product. And you're talking about 50, 60 pound receivers that are, you know, maybe rated at 90 watts a channel, all channels driven, instead of 150 watts from a Denon that weighs the same amount. So, I mean, it's just, it goes a long way. And I think it's time. The same crap happened in the auto industry years ago with Honda and Toyota. They both got busted for overinflating horsepower numbers. And back in the day, I owned an Acura TL. I thought I had 270 horsepower. To come and find the next year later, they derated it to 258. Meanwhile, BMW was rating their 300 horsepower engines too conservatively when they were really like 330, 340 horsepower. So, I mean, and you could see the difference in driving dynamics as a result. So you could fool some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. So let's hope for the best. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think we're off to a good start. I want to also take this opportunity to thank all the folks at Sound United for inviting us and for really taking great care of us, being very open, honest throughout the process. And I think it takes a lot of courage for a company to, you know, take the stance that they did. So I think we need to give them their due and their thanks to them.
Oh yeah, they were very open about answering any question that was thrown at them, and there were some really good questions, man. I was really impressed. There was this editor from Consumer Electronics Daily, Rebecca Day, and I was really impressed with the questions she was asking. Very business-oriented questions, and they were being very open about everything that they could be open about, and it was refreshing. I mean, I feel like Kevin Duffy has the pulse on the industry. He's a young CEO. He seems like he's very intelligent, very capable. He's surrounded by very intelligent people there. I mean, all the guys we met at Sound United, and women, of course, they really had a passion for what they were doing. You could tell they liked their jobs.
Yeah, no question about it. So, you know what? I felt good about the company. I feel good about the brands. And I have to tell you, you know, my wife, I came back really energized about a lot of the possibility, because this could be a Borg situation, like we started things off, right?
Yeah.
But they recognize the balancing act that they have to do, and if anybody's going to do a good job with it, I got to tip my hat thus far. Just kudos. So I think all enthusiasts and everybody listening needs to know that things are on the right trajectory from our vantage point of what we saw.
Right. I'm just going to pop real quick at the chat questions here. My voice is kind of losing it, so I probably will go back and answer whatever I can answer here separately. Let's see what people have said here. Sounds like an impeding monopoly. Well, yeah, I mean, to some extent. I mean, don't forget, guys, you still have Samsung that owns all the Harman brands. That's a huge entity. And you still have Yamaha as its own entity. And Yamaha's a big company, though. Don't discount Yamaha, man. They make everything from receivers to pianos to jet skis. So that's a big company right there. I have to agree regarding Marantz and Denon being very similar. Bring back the look of the old silver blue Marantz stuff from the 70s. Everyone loves to spend mountains of money on that stuff. Yeah, that's true. Gene's the king of audio. Thanks for that. Onkyo bought Pioneer for technology, but immediately Onkyo products went up in price. So, you know, maybe they did a little bit, but Onkyo, I think it's important to mention this. The Onkyo receivers that are $1,000 and less, they were selling those receivers to be loss leaders. I mean, they were giving you a lot of technology, a lot of power for the money. There was some of the best values over the last couple of years, and I think they were trying to gain market share. So it'll be interesting to see how their price structure is once they're acquired by Sound United, because I don't know if that's even maintainable at that point. We'll see. The BP 9080 have 12-inch powered subs. Yes, good. I was right about that. You do great videos. I love the Denon amplifier. I have Klipsch towers, powered subs. Yeah, Klipsch is another big entity not to discount too. I mean, they're still a juggernaut in the industry, and they're on their own. Oh, thanks, JT. Super chat, no question. Just wanted to say thanks. Learned a ton. Appreciate that. What happens to MCACC? I don't even know how to say that. Mackie? I never know how to say Pioneer's room correction right. I always get the acronym wrong and the letters. Who thought of it? It's almost like YPOW. Like, what the heck does YPOW mean? Come on.
I just hope that Onkyo's room correction just gets nuked. It's the worst one I've ever experienced.
Oh, the AccuQ? Oh, good. Because I never turned mine on. So
it's awful.
I honestly think the reason why they went with that was for cost. In order to hit those price points the Onkyo receivers were hitting, they had to drop Odyssey. And also maybe they changed the chipset and they used the built-in room correction in that chipset. Because I don't even know if AccuQ is an Onkyo brand or if it's just built into the chipset that they used. But Mackie, I'm not a huge fan of the Mackie room correction. I didn't find it very useful for bass, but I know there's a lot of people that like it. I don't imagine that that's going to go away. I think there's a big following of Pioneer enthusiasts that like it. Brian Schlip says he's missing Hugo. Sorry, man. Teo, you're no Hugo.
I cannot compete with Hugo. I don't pretend to compete with Hugo. No way, shape, or form, man.
Oh, my God.
I'll come up with some Greek phrases for you. How's that?
There you go. Is it better to bounce house speakers facing you or have them come from behind you? Whatever you do with them, you don't want them really at ear level. You want to try to get them above ear level if you can, and don't sit more than don't sit closer than a couple of feet away, because then you start localizing them. Yeah, I mean, you got to place them within what the Dolby guidelines say for the top, for the front and the rears, but don't know what else to tell you there. Do you have top of the speakers or on the wall? Do you have them on top of the speakers or on wall? I'm not sure what they mean by that.
If we're talking about the definitive technologies, or in my setup, I've done both. So I've done the on-wall front and rear with the SVS speakers, and I also have discrete in-ceiling speakers. So I always found those to be better options than using the Atmos-enabled speakers, for sure.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, if you want sound to come from a particular location, put the speaker in that location. That's always the best bet you can do. you're not bouncing sound from your front speakers off a wall to get to you at your front chair. So anyways, I think I always talk about that too much. So that and power are like my two biggest pet peeves in audio right now. It used to be cables. It took me a decade to get off of cables, and I'm only now getting back into cables because people keep asking me. So don't get me started, because once I start, I don't stop. I get all jittery.
Well, everybody's got to get to bed, me included, at some point. So
Well,
if there aren't any more questions.
Yeah, we're wrapping this up, guys. I just want to mention again, if you become a patron, go to patreon.com/audioholics to become a patron of our channel. You can go in and request certain video topics you want us to cover. You can go and pop questions and I'll go and answer. You'll get content there sometimes before we release it to the public on the audioholics.com website. In fact, I'll probably put the Sound United article there before it goes live. So if you become a patron, you get to read it before everybody else. And Teo, thanks for being here tonight. I know it's past your bedtime. I'm just getting started. I'm going to go eat dinner now, and I'm going to be working for the next couple hours. I'm a freaking Batman type hour schedules when I work. So that's just me. I like the night. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this conversation we had here. We're very excited about Sound United. We're very excited about what's to come. We hope that they continue to do this event once a year so we could come back and report on it. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.